When I was very young, I snuck downstairs in the middle of the night to turn on the television. What I saw when I was skipping through channels on cable still haunts my dreams. A girl speaking in a raspy voice no girl could possibly have, saying awful things I won't repeat, as her eyes rolled back into her head and she levitated off the bed. This was my first experience with the film The Exorcist. As it turns out, when my father was in his early 20s, he saw The Exorcist during its original theatrical run, and now he will never go near the horror genre again. When I asked my friends and family this week what movies scared them as children, the majority of them told me about their negligent parents who turned a blind eye to horror legends like Freddy Krueger, Chucky, and yes, even the demonic possession in The Exorcist. I then asked what kids' movies scared you, as in specifically G-rated and marketed with children in mind. I was surprised that this was the harder one for them to answer. But after some tugging, at the top of the list were the Pleasure Island scene in Pinocchio, the Heffalumps from Winnie the Pooh, and Gene Wilder in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And this still happens today. My old roommate's 4-year-old is having trouble sleeping whenever she thinks about the frenzied carnivorous otter from Zootopia. It's her literal nightmare fuel. So why do we do this to our kids? We want to protect them at all costs, but the movies they see end up inducing horrifying images that stay with them. What movies are the most notorious culprits that haunt their dreams? Why did parents allow this to happen? And could there be a benefit to exposing our kids to these visuals that give them goosebumps? Welcome to Another Lens. My name's Jay Kennedy, and I like movies. On this show, I'd like to explore what's happening today in the cinema landscape, dive into a few Hollywood films, and share with you my thoughts about movies. So if you'll join me, grab a hot cup, get comfy, and let's take a look from another lens. During the Bronze Age, the Greek myths contained terrifying monsters. Here's a couple that come to mind. The Minotaur, with the body of a man and the head of a bull, devouring human sacrifices sent to him through a labyrinth. The Furies, vengeful spirits tasked with punishing those who had committed grave crimes and were said to be terrifying hags. And my personal favorite, the Gorgon Medusa, who has snakes for hair and could turn you to stone just by looking at her. Scholars date these stories around the 4th or 5th centuries, and their tradition of terrifying anyone who heard them kept these stories alive. Today, we see all 3 of these monsters in the Disney Plus TV series, marketed for family viewing, in Percy Jackson and the Olympians. So we've been doing this for a while, scaring the bejeebers out of the kids in our lives. But why would we do this? Experiencing fear can help children develop an understanding of the dangers and risks all around them. We basically are born into a world that could kill us at a moment's notice. So a healthy dose of fear when we're kids keeps us a little bit safer. I mean, if we were living in a cave and there were massive saber-toothed cats out there hunting, you might want to let your kid have that fear. But more than that, confronting fear as a child and working to overcome it can build confidence in your kids. By facing their fears in a safe and supportive way, like watching movies, children learn that they have the strength and ability to cope with these setbacks. And let's face it, fearful experiences provide opportunities for kids to practice regulating their emotions. If they're too afraid, they have to know how to rein that in. I mean, we all could use a little reining in from time to time when fear gets the better of us. And yes, I'm talking about my wife during any amusement park ride. But by learning to manage your fear responses, that can benefit you in various areas of your life, and your kids will benefit too. Before we go down the dark side of Disney, I thought it would be a great idea to skim past a topic we've already dove into before: the Universal monsters. When I spoke to senior members of my circle, they often pointed to Abbott and Costello Meet the Wolfman as the movie that spooked them right out of their minds when they were kids. This was one of the biggest success stories in my favorite genre, horror comedy. And even though it was released in 1948, in the glory days of the Hays Code, this was considered pretty family-friendly content. But with people turning into werewolves, a myriad of jump scares, and eerie dark atmosphere, it's no wonder this is the one that our boomer generations rhyme off when thinking of the movies that really freaked them out as kids. And even though the Universal monsters could be considered light horror fare for all ages, the iconic characters would find their way into a lot of children's media after the 50s. A beloved TV series called The Munsters debuted in 1964 about a home filled with monsters. The show has the cast standing in for racial diversity conversations of the day. Scooby-Doo premiered in Saturday morning television slots in 1969. Scooby-Dooby-Doo! And in 1987, there was an attempt to revitalize the Universal monsters with a film about a group of kids that formed a very niche club called The Monster Squad. And Adam Sandler's Hotel Transylvania franchise continues to delight kids with the familiar, misunderstood creatures that include the Invisible Man, a werewolf, Dracula, and Frankenstein's monster. This all really lines up with why movies are important for kids to watch. Children can explore and better understand the different feelings that they have. Over time, this develops a person's empathy, exposure to different ideas, and overall emotional intelligence. So, these monsters that are certainly making our kids feel one way in these family-friendly jaunts are actually helping them grow. But Jay, these are all in good fun. Where is the nightmare fuel? All right, let's step back in time to one of the most timeless tales we have in film history. Amidst vibrant colors and endearing characters lies a shadowy presence that has haunted the dreams of countless children, including myself, the sinister figure cloaked in darkness, terrifying four companions on a magical adventure. Cackling laughter and malevolent schemes struck fear into the hearts of the innocent. I mean, who can forget the chilling descent of flying monkeys at the whim of the Wicked Witch of the West? After I first saw The Wizard of Oz, I was constantly thinking about how I would melt that witch and fight off those evil flying monkeys. And so were countless other kids. The visionary filmmaker behind Pan's Labyrinth and The Shape of Water, Guillermo del Toro, has spoken about his childhood fear of the Wicked Witch of the West, and that it left a lasting impression. And one filmmaker who has scared his share of kids, Tim Burton, expressed he's afraid of the flying monkeys. He even referenced them in his film Batman Returns in 1992, when Danny DeVito as the Penguin commands an army of flightless bird commandos that do bear a slight resemblance to the monkeys. The Wizard of Oz has been properly traumatizing children since 1939. When we move into the early days of Disney, there's a few different nightmares for kids. Bambi's mother's death in 1942 stayed with a lot of young viewers. The Queen's nightmarish transformation into the old hag in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is visually freaky. And when Dumbo gets drunk on champagne, seriously, this happens in the movie, he hallucinates terrifying elephants on parade. But the no-holds-barred, terrifying scene for me from the 1940s has to be Pinocchio taking a trip to Pleasure Island. It starts off with fun and games, some underage cigar smoking while playing pool, but then the naughtier children playing hooky start snorting, grunting, wheezing, and finally braying as they begin turning into donkeys to be sold for labor. And when Pinocchio grows long ears, we want this nightmare to end. Walt Disney himself reportedly insisted that the film contained these elements of darkness and moral lessons in order to balance out the fantastical elements of the story. And man, the Pleasure Island scenes certainly left a mark. Disney has a long history of scaring the pants off kids, and later in the studio's lifetime, Walt Disney Productions made a live-action movie that to this day gives my wife the creeps. Filled with a gothic atmosphere, Jan and her family experience a series of unexplained supernatural occurrences, including strange sounds and ghostly apparitions, after moving into a large English manor in the country. Creepy imagery unsettles all the viewers, not just the kids, as an older Betty Davis skulks around the property. Based on the 1976 book, The Watcher in the Woods has been freaking kids out since 1980. The film was so chilling that it warranted a PG rating. And we know now that it had an impact on Family Guy creator Seth MacFarlane. The animator's Peacock spin-off show Ted, based on the movies, recently framed a Halloween episode around the Watcher in the Woods mirror scares. Sadly, it's really difficult to get a hold of a quality copy of the film, as Disney has distanced itself in subsequent home video releases. And as of today, it's not available yet on any streaming services, and that includes Disney+. It's since become a cult classic, surrounded by urban legends like an alternate ending that was so scary, Disney reshot it. Or that director John Huff's production was cursed when he started experiencing phenomenon on set. I really hope The Watcher in the Woods gets a decent release again soon, so we can revisit this freaky gem. And while Disney continued to freak us out, as evidence from my friend's 4-year-old otter troubles, they weren't the only studio getting in on the market to scare our kids. Probably the film that came up the most when I asked my friends what movie traumatized them was based on a book by a beloved children's author. And it surrounded the most benign subject matter, candy. In fact, Paddington 2 director Paul King just created a prequel to the story, which is completely endearing. And if I'm being honest, it's my favorite movie of last year. And clearly it's staged before the character completely snapped, becoming the unhinged Gene Wilder in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Gene Wilder once stated in interviews that he wanted to portray the character as a mad genius with a dark and mysterious side. When you're introduced to the character as he somersaults forward to meet the guests at the factory, no one knew he was going to do that. While shooting, he kept his character very unpredictable. Wilder believed that Willy Wonka should be portrayed as a complex and multidimensional character rather than a straightforward hero or villain. And that tracks, because aside from whimsical musical numbers, Willy is busy watching kids turn into blueberries, shrink down to pocket size, and drowning gluttonous children in chocolate rivers. Who can forget the most memorable and controversial moments in the film when Wonka takes the golden ticket winners on a boat ride through the dark and psychedelic tunnel? Nightmare fuel. But for all the fear, the film does play up to the fates of the children who misbehave as cautionary tales, with consequences that may be frightening or disturbing to younger viewers, even if it's not frightening for Willy. Author of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Roald Dahl, once remarked, "I have a passion for teaching kids to become readers, to become comfortable with a book, not daunted." books shouldn't be daunting. They should be funny, exciting, and wonderful. And learning to be a reader gives a terrific advantage. And while some of Dahl's books contain more frightening elements, his intent was not to terrify children, but rather entertain them with stories that push the boundaries of imagination and challenge conventional storytelling norms. And if that was his aim, I'm not sure director Nicholas Roeg got the message in 1990 when he directed Dahl's adaptation of The Witches. And this is where I'll inject some of my own experience, because at the beginning of The Witches, the grandmother tells her grandson some stories about witches abducting children that to this day sticks with me. There's a story about a girl that is kidnapped, and then she begins appearing in a painting over the remainder of her life. And this is just a setup that reminds us as small children that we are very vulnerable. Definitely do not talk to strangers. But then we get to the horrifying and grotesque makeup of the Grand High Witch screaming to kill all the children in England and then the world. She ends up turning our hero into a mouse for the rest of the film and tries to squish him underfoot. I'm not saying this wasn't my biggest fear for a few grades, but I will say I kept an eye out for any purple-eyed people I met on my way home from school after this. And if my parents let me watch these type of stories over and over, it could have become a serious issue. Scary stories before bedtime every night can lead to nightmares and sleep disturbance that isn't healthy. Constant exposure to frightening stuff can lead to depression in kids, causing them to become withdrawn or avoidant as a result of being afraid all of the time. So, this is a once in a while thing. When your kid is scared, it's important to make them feel safe and work through the thing that scared them, which is totally not what my parents did. We spoke earlier about the first movies that come to mind that scared you as a kid. And the names that my friends pulled out were not geared towards children at all. So, where were the parents? The most common answer to this one is that a lot of kids watched rated R horror movies at sleepovers and birthday parties growing up. And parents don't normally supervise everything that's happening at these parties, especially when they're growing older. And this is where the experts have differing opinions. Some argue that exposure to this type of content can have potential benefits, specifically around social bonding. You're watching something together and it's scary, and you're sharing in those shared feelings. This can help strengthen friendships, and it actually provides opportunities for kids to talk about what scared them and realize that they're not the only ones afraid. That's pretty cool. But other experts say exposing children to this type of content at a young age can desensitize them to violence and inappropriate behavior, and might lead to increased aggression or anxiety. But my generation, the millennials, we all did this. This was like a rite of passage. I still remember the night I was home alone with my childhood best friend after begging my mom to let us watch Freddy's Dead. There was a massive storm and it knocked out the power, and we ran to the neighbors, fearing Freddy Krueger would get us. And there's another element to why I knew who Freddy Krueger was. It was marketed to me. All of this stuff was marketed at kids. There were action figures for movies like Predator and RoboCop. Terminator 2 was the second highest grossing movie of 1991, behind Beauty and the Beast. And I'm pretty sure I saw more commercials asking me to buy a T-1000 toy than pick up the VHS copy of Disney's Tale as Old as Time. But kids were buying them. Parents were buying them. Ultimately, the decision to market toys based on R-rated movies are driven by consumer demand. If kids wanted them, toy companies were willing to meet that demand, regardless of the film's rating. And we haven't really changed that much. Most kids love Deadpool. You know, the most successful rated R superhero franchise of all time. I looked it up. There are toys. I wanted to bring up one more film that almost every person from Gen Z I spoke to mentioned. And it's a big one. Based yet again on a book, the director also made A Nightmare Before Christmas. And I know you're thinking, oh, it's Tim Burton, the guy who gave us that other terrifying Willy Wonka. But surprise, he only produced A Nightmare Before Christmas. Henry Selick was the director of that one and the claymated movie in question, Coraline. This movie creeps me right out. The other world with its button-eyed inhabitants is very twisted. The other mother may be the scariest villain on this list today. She presents herself as caring and attentive, offering Coraline everything she wants, but this kindness is a facade to lure Coraline into her trap. That is every kid's nightmare, feeling like they were fooled and trapped. And I know Other Father is less scary, but even when he's playing that instrument with mechanical hands, it's all creepy, right down to the talking cat. In interviews, Selick has acknowledged that Coraline is intended to be a dark and unsettling story, but he has also emphasized that it is ultimately a tale of empowerment and self-discovery. I can see that. Coraline definitely takes it upon herself to become the hero of her own story. And maybe many kids who have felt fear from this flick can do the same. Author Neil Gaiman has described Coraline as a dark fantasy or a fairy tale and has praised the film's adaptation of his story. And he has spoken about his views on children reading and watching scary or dark content, and it's his belief that children are often more resilient and capable of handling scary stories than we adults give them credit for. And even though a ton of great family movies have left a lasting impression on us since childhood, I haven't spoken with anybody who stopped watching movies or have been so badly traumatized that they can't speak about it with a smile. And that's when I remembered. Being scared can be kind of fun, and spooky things when you're young are exciting. I hope going forward, we keep getting movies for kids like 2006's Monster House, Paranorman from 2012, or even Netflix's The Curse of Bridge Hollow from 2022 with Marlon Wayans as a Halloween-hating dad who has to team up with his teenage daughter when the town's decorations come to life. It's silly, but spooky, and like we've learned today, it's important that movies give the little ones a scare from time to time. Just maybe don't let them control the TV at 3 a.m. when The Exorcist is on a streaming service, because that one will stick with you. I really appreciate you sticking through to the end and hope you enjoyed this fun episode. Next week is the season 1 finale. I've got a stack of books to read to prepare for more episodes in season 2. Until next week, reach out to me anytime at j.kennedy@outlook.com. Another Lens can be found on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Now the show we share together can be shared with your friends too, so please let them know all about it. And if you want, you can leave the podcast a review with your thoughts. New episodes are available weekly, so if you haven't, be sure to subscribe for the next one. I'm Jay Kennedy, and you've been listening to Another Lens. The show will be back soon with our next deep dive.